is a text buried in the Egyptian desert for 1600 years in which Jesus describes the crucifixion in his own words. He says he was laughing. I found it in a used bookstore in Chicago, winter of 1999. I was 26 years old between semesters, not looking for anything in particular. The store was the kind that had no system. Shelves going to the ceiling, the smell of old paper and steam heat. Books stacked horizontally on top of books that were shelved vertically. No logic to any of it. I was running my hand along a shelf somewhere near the back. I remember it was near the back because the light was worse there, when I pulled out a book with a yellowed spine and a $4 sticker. The Nag Hammadi Library in English. Edited by James M. Robinson. Harper & Row, 1988. I had heard of Nag Hammadi. I knew the general outline. 13 leather-bound codices found in Upper Egypt in 1945. 52 ancient texts, some of them predating or contemporaneous with the canonical Gospels. I knew it had been a significant discovery. I had never read any of it. I bought it. $4. I took it on the subway home. Somewhere around the third or fourth stop, I found Codex VII. The Second Treatise of the Great Seth. I did not know what it was. I read the introduction. And then I started reading the text itself. And I found the passage where Jesus, speaking in the first person, a first-person monologue describing the crucifixion, says this: "They were striking me with a scourge, but someone else, Simon, bore the cross on his shoulder. I was on high, laughing at their ignorance." I read it again. I missed my stop. I sat in the subway car past the last station on the line, reading the same paragraph while the train sat and the conductor walked through and eventually asked if I was getting off. I was not immediately thinking about the theological implications. I was not thinking about what this meant for the doctrine of atonement or the structural necessity of the sacrifice. I was thinking one thing. This text exists. This has been sitting in the ground in Upper Egypt since the 4th century. And before that it was circulating. And before that someone wrote it down. And someone before that told the story. And the story is Jesus' own account of what happened on the cross. And the Jesus in this account was not suffering. He was watching, and he was laughing. I got off at the next stop and took the train back. My name is Nathan. Former high school history teacher, Evansville, Indiana. 12 years at a Catholic school teaching world history and early Christianity. I resigned when the evidence kept leading me somewhere the institution was not prepared to follow. Let me tell you what the Second Treatise of the Great Seth actually is. It is one of 52 texts contained in the Nag Hammadi Library, 13 leather-bound codices discovered in December of 1945 by a farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman. He was digging for fertilizer near a cliff face called Jabal al-Tarif, outside the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt. His mattock struck a sealed clay jar buried in the ground. According to his own account, he hesitated before opening it. Egyptian tradition holds that sealed jars sometimes contain jinn. He opened it anyway. Inside, papyrus, pages of closely written Coptic text. He did not know what he had found. The scholarly world would spend the next decades finding out. The codices eventually made their way to the Coptic Museum in Cairo. James Robinson, a scholar at Claremont Graduate University and the general editor of what became the standard English translation, led the international team that made the texts available to the world in 1977, with an expanded edition in 1988. The Second Treatise of the Great Seth is in Codex VII. Scholars date the original Greek text to approximately 200 CE. The Coptic manuscript is a translation. It is not the original, but the theology it represents is older than the manuscript. The text is a first-person monologue. It purports to be Jesus speaking after the crucifixion, explaining what actually happened. What the witnesses saw, he says, was not what occurred. The physical form on the cross was not him. Simon of Cyrene, the man named in the canonical Gospels as the one compelled to carry the cross, bore it not as an act of incidental service, but as a substitute. Here is the passage in Robinson's translation. "It was another, their father, who drank the gall and the vinegar. It was not I. They struck me with the reed. It was another, Simon, who bore the cross on his shoulder. It was another upon whom they placed the crown of thorns. But I was rejoicing in the height over all the wealth of the archons and the offspring of their error, their empty glory, and I was laughing at their ignorance. There it is, written down around 200 CE, buried around 367 CE, discovered in 1945, published in 1977, for 1600 years, sealed in a clay jar under Egyptian sand. And that jar was buried for a reason. Good Friday. You know what the light is like in the church on Good Friday. It is deliberate. The kind of dimness that is managed, not accidental. The candles make shadows that move. There is a wooden cross at the front, placed on the altar or propped against the wall, large enough to be uncomfortable to look at directly. You have been there, maybe you still go, maybe you have not gone in years, but you know the service. The priest, or the minister, or whoever it is who leads this in your tradition, says the sentence the liturgy always says. He suffered for you. He died for you. You have heard that sentence since you were small enough to not fully understand what suffering meant. You have heard it enough times that it has a physical weight to it, a specific pressure in the chest when the words land. The grammar of the sentence contains an obligation. He suffered. For you. The preposition does the work. The preposition makes you responsible for the suffering being necessary, and you have carried that. The way people carry things they were handed before they were old enough to evaluate whether they wanted to hold them. The lights are low. People around you are weeping, some of them loudly, some quietly, the kind of tears that move slowly and do not ask for attention. And somewhere in the darkness of that service, not loudly, not clearly, just as a flicker at the edge of a thought you were not quite having, you have wondered whether the suffering was ever the point, or whether someone decided at some point after the fact that it needed to be. Because suffering as the point creates a specific kind of need in the people who are told about it. It creates the need for mediation, for an institution to stand between the one who suffered and the ones who carry the guilt, and offer forgiveness on behalf of the one who suffered. Remove the physical suffering, and the mechanism stops. The guilt has nothing to anchor to. The institution has no function. You did not think all of this in the pew on Good Friday. You just felt the weight of the preposition. He suffered. For you. And something in you. Quiet, not accusatory, just careful. Wondered who needed that sentence to be true. The theology in the Second Treatise of the Great Seth is not an invention of the 2nd century. It is a transmission. Basilides was an Alexandrian theologian, teaching in roughly 120 to 140 CE. Alexandria, the intellectual capital of the ancient Mediterranean. The same city where Philo of Alexandria had developed his extraordinary synthesis of Torah and Platonic philosophy a century earlier. Not a provincial backwater. The center. Basilides taught what scholars call the substitution hypothesis. His specific version, documented not in his own writings which have not survived, but in the hostile account of Irenaeus, was this. Simon of Cyrene was transformed by Jesus to appear like him and crucified in his place. Jesus himself assumed the form of Simon and stood there watching, laughing at those who were deceiving themselves. That is from Irenaeus of Lyon, Against Heresies, Book 1, Chapter 24, Section 4, written approximately 180 CE. I want to stop on that source for a moment. Irenaeus was writing against heresies for a reason. He was fighting. You do not write a book against a fringe position. You write a book against something that is spreading. Basilides was teaching this in Alexandria in approximately 120 CE. That is 80 to 90 years after the crucifixion. He was not inventing something from nothing. He was transmitting a tradition that had reached him from somewhere, 80 to 90 years after the event, within living memory of the generation that was alive. Not a legend from the distant past, a theological position already old enough to be received tradition. And for the next 200 years, from Irenaeus writing in 180 to the formation of the canon in the 4th century, the proto-orthodox church actively argued against it. 200 years. That is not a fringe position that quietly died. That is a position the institution with the most to lose spent 2 full centuries arguing against. When you spend 200 years fighting a theological alternative, You fight it because it is winning converts. It was winning converts because it was making sense to people. The question is what sense it was making, and why that sense was so dangerous. Here is something I need you to look at. Open your Bible to Mark chapter 15, verse 21, Matthew 27, verse 32, Luke 23, verse 26. All three synoptic gospels, all three, record the same moment. Roman soldiers are leading Jesus to the place of execution, and they encounter a man named Simon from Cyrene coming in from the countryside, and they compel him to carry the cross. That is the English rendering of a specific Greek verb, agarouein. It means to conscript, to press into service by force. The same verb appears in Matthew chapter 5, verse 41. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2. It is a compulsion verb. So here is the question the Gnostic tradition was asking 1700 years before the internet made it easier to ask. If Jesus was already carrying the cross, if the standard picture is accurate, why would Roman soldiers need to compel a random bystander to carry it? The Roman execution detail knew their job. They were not going to hand the cross to someone else unless there was a reason. 3 independent Gospels record this compulsion. None of them explains it. The Gnostics noticed the gap. They noticed it around 200 CE. They had an answer. I'm not telling you their answer is historically accurate. I am telling you that the gap they noticed is in your canonical text. It has been there for 2,000 years, and nobody in Sunday school ever asked you to look at the verb, agarouein. They compelled him. The text has been asking this question the entire time. If you have ever sat in a church service and felt that the guilt was structural, not incidental, not a side effect, but the point, you were not being faithless. You were reading the institution accurately. There is a theology, the one in the Second Treatise in Basilides, in the communities that buried those texts in the ground, in which Jesus did not suffer physically, in which the divine cannot be made to suffer by the ignorant, in which the crucifixion was not a sacrifice but a misapprehension. If that theology is true, even in part, then the guilt the liturgy places in the preposition is not a description of an event. It is a mechanism that creates a need. Remove the physical suffering, and the mechanism stops working. The guilt has no anchor, the institution has no function. You felt that. Maybe not in those terms, maybe not as a structural analysis, but you felt the weight of the obligation in the grammar, and you wondered quietly in the place where you do not say things out loud, whether someone needed you to feel it. You were not wrong to wonder. You were reading the sentence with the part of you that was paying attention. The Second Treatise of the Great Seth is not the only place Jesus laughs. I want to show you the pattern. In the Gospel of Judas, Codex Chakos, dated approximately 280 CE, lost for 16 centuries, rediscovered in 2006, Jesus laughs 4 times. He laughs at the disciples who are praying at the opening of the text. He laughs at the ignorance of those who believe they are worshipping the right God. 4 times in a single text. In the Coptic Apocalypse of Peter, Nag Hammadi Codex VII, a separate text from the Second Treatise, Jesus appears above the cross. Not on the cross, above it. He is described as laughing and joyful. The living Jesus explains to Peter that what is being crucified is only a substitute. The one hanging there is not the real Jesus. The real Jesus is watching from above, explaining what is happening. That is a third text. 3 separate Gnostic documents, the Second Treatise of the Great Seth, the Coptic Apocalypse of Peter, the Gospel of Judas, all contain a laughing Jesus in the context of the crucifixion or its immediate vicinity. 3 texts, 3 different codices, multiple distinct scribal and transmission traditions. Bart Ehrman, professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, whose Lost Christianities was published by Oxford University Press in 2003, has documented that these texts represent genuinely independent streams of early Christian tradition. They are not copying each other. They arrive at the same image from different angles. 3 independent traditions across 2.5 centuries, all producing a Jesus who is not suffering. All 3 buried, all 3 absent from every canon the institution produced. Now let me give you Elaine Pagel's, Pagels, professor of religion at Princeton University, whose The Gnostic Gospels was published by Random House in 1979, identified something that stopped me the first time I read it. She writes, "The Gnostics had no martyrs." Read that sentence carefully. The proto-orthodox church produced martyrs from the earliest decades. Believers went to their deaths rather than renounce their faith. The tradition of martyrdom became central to the church's identity. Dying for your faith was following the pattern of Jesus' death. It was the highest possible act of imitation. The Gnostics had no martyrs. Pagels' explanation is structural. If Jesus did not suffer physically, if the divine cannot be made to suffer by those who do not understand what they are looking at, then there is no pattern to imitate. Physical suffering for the faith is not a pathway to the divine. It is simply physical suffering. An institution that needs you to suffer in imitation of its founder cannot survive a theology that says the founder did not suffer, and an institution that derives its authority from standing between you and the one who suffered for you, dispensing forgiveness, mediating guilt, managing the moral debt created by the sacrifice. That institution has no function if the sacrifice never happened. The Gnostics did not threaten a doctrine. They threatened a dependency. That is a different kind of threat. Doctrines can be argued. Dependencies, once established, are very hard to remove. The institution fought for 200 years. It did not fight because the alternative was obviously wrong. It fought because the alternative was obviously threatening. After Forbidden Gospels launched, I received a lot of email. Most of it is what you would expect. People who had been waiting for permission to say something they had been thinking for years. People who were angry. People who were grateful. People who thought I had it wrong. About 8 months in, I received an email from a priest. He did not give me his name. He asked me not to use it if he did. He had been serving in the same parish for 22 years. He named the diocese, a real one, in the American Midwest. He said he had known about the Second Treatise of the Great Seth since seminary. He said he had never mentioned it from the pulpit. I read that sentence 3 times. He had known since seminary, 22 years of service, never mentioned it. Not because he thought it was false. His email made clear he had his own views on what the text meant, and they were careful and specific views. He did not mention it because, and this is his phrasing, not mine, he said, "I don't think this text challenges faith. I think it challenges the business model. Those are different things. I thought you should know that someone inside knows." He wrote one more sentence. He said, "Most of the people I know who have been in seminary know about this. It is not a secret at that level. It is simply not discussed with the congregation. There is a difference between what is known and what is said, and I am not sure the people in the pews understand how wide that difference is." I wrote back once. I thanked him. I asked one follow-up question. I never heard from him again. I do not know if he is still in that parish. I do not know what he has said or not said since then. What I know is what he sent me. The business model sentence. I think it challenges the business model. Not the faith. The business model. A working priest, 22 years of service, unnamed, who emailed a stranger because he thought the stranger should know that the distinction the Second Treatise draws between what is spiritually real and what the institution needs to be real is a distinction people inside the institution already make. And then they go back to the pulpit, and on Good Friday they say the sentence with the preposition in it. Somewhere in Upper Egypt, in the year 367 CE, a monk held a text he had been ordered to destroy. Athanasius of Alexandria had issued his Easter letter that year. He listed the canonical books. He ordered non-canonical texts destroyed. The monk was at the monastery of St. Pachomius near Nag Hammadi. He had access to a library of texts that did not appear on Athanasius's list. He had a choice: burn them or don't. Picture him. Not as a figure of rebellion, not as a hero of the suppressed truth, just as a man probably cold, probably tired, holding a leather-bound codex that his superiors had told him contained something that should not survive. He made a decision. He gathered the texts, 13 codices, more than 1,000 pages of Coptic script, and he sealed them in a clay jar. He carried the jar to the cliff face at Jabal al-Tarif. He buried it. He went back to his cell. He may have been found out. He may have spent the rest of his life wondering if someone would dig up the jar. He may have died before anyone did. What he believed about the texts he buried, whether he believed the laughing Jesus was the true account, whether he buried them out of theological conviction, or simply because he could not bring himself to burn anything that had been written down. We do not know. What he believed, we cannot know. What he did, we know. He chose to preserve rather than burn. He was not asked to preserve, he was asked to destroy. He put the text in the ground instead. And 1600 years later, a man digging for fertilizer struck the jar, and the text that said Jesus was laughing came back into the world. The monk did not know you would exist. He did not know the jar would last. He sealed it and carried it to the cliff and buried it and walked away. The text he was holding said that Jesus had been watching the crucifixion from above, laughing at the ignorance of the people who thought they were killing him. The monk chose to put that sentence in the ground rather than in the fire. I don't know what to call that except an act. I want to be honest about where J.J. Benitez fits in this particular investigation. Benitez is not primarily a scholar of Gnostic texts. His work is not a commentary on the Nag Hammadi library. Across the 10 volumes of Caballo de Troya and more than 30 other books, his engagement with the crucifixion comes from a different angle. The time-traveling American pilots who witnessed the events of the 1st century from within them. He does not, in those volumes, endorse the substitution hypothesis directly, but he does something structurally similar. He notes, across multiple volumes and in interviews spanning 4 decades of public statements, that the crucifixion is the event the Church needs most. It is the hinge on which the entire theological architecture swings. And it is also the event about which the sources diverge most. The canonical Gospels disagree on details, the timing, the specific words from the cross, what Jesus said and when and to whom, who was standing where, the sequence of the hours. In a corpus of documents that is generally treated as a unified and coherent record, the crucifixion is the episode where the accounts are least consistent with each other. Benitez asks the question directly. Why is the most important event also the most contradicted? His methodology in Caballo de Troya is not something I can verify the way I verify Pagels or Ehrman. He is not a peer-reviewed academic. His time-travel framework requires commitments I cannot make in the same way. But the question he raises is not methodologically dependent on the time-travel framework. It is a historical observation. The most theologically essential event in the Christian narrative is also the most textually unstable. And the Second Treatise of the Great Seth, circulating around 200 CE, transmitted from a tradition going back at least to Basilides in 120 CE, provides one explanation for why the accounts diverge. If different communities in the 1st and 2nd centuries had genuinely different information about what happened at the crucifixion, if the substitution theology was a live and competing account, not a later invention, then the divergence in the canonical accounts is not carelessness. It is the trace of a dispute that the winning side tried to close. Benitez identifies the dispute. Ehrman and Pagels document its contours. The Second Treatise preserves the losing position. And the monk at Jabal al-Tarif, in 367 CE, put a copy in the ground so that someone someday could read it. Good Friday again. You are in the church, or you are sitting somewhere quiet, thinking about the church, the way people think about places they have left but not entirely left behind. The low light, the wooden cross at the front, the people weeping, the sentence with the preposition, "He suffered for you." The question used to feel like doubt, like something wrong with you, like a gap in your faith that the right amount of effort might close. It is not a gap in your faith. It is a question about who needed that sentence to be true. The institution needed it. Pagels understood that. The Gnostics understood it 1600 years before she wrote it down. If there is no sacrifice, there is no debt. If there is no debt, there is no need for mediation. If there is no mediation, the institution has no function. The laughing Jesus does not threaten what Jesus taught. He threatens what was built around what Jesus taught, and that is a different thing entirely. The monk in 367 CE understood the difference. He held the text that said, Jesus was laughing at the cross. He had been told to burn it. He buried it instead. And you are here, carrying the weight of a preposition that was placed in a sentence by people who needed you to carry it. The question is not whether someone was on that cross. Someone was. The question is, what does it mean that someone was? And who needed it to mean what they said it means? That question was in the clay jar, sealed, buried, 1600 years in the dark. It is out now. It was always going to get out. The monk made sure of that. This is Nathan, Forbidden Gospels. I'll let you sit with that.